Now on Radio 4, we return to the ancient city of the sharp-nosed fish. This week, Michael Cousteau meets the people whose lives are spent piecing together the 50,000 fragments of papyrus, which are all that remain to us of an ancient Egyptian city under Roman rule.
It's like looking through a curtain, a dark blackout curtain with some tears in it, and every so often you see a little chink of light that illuminates something, but you don't really know what's going on behind the curtain at all. That's what papyrology is like.
Tuder, Pantechnois, Feistru Palamais, Caathanas, Tisorruthmos of Phinotor, Calcioimen Toikoi.
A poem by Pindar in ancient Greek. It was pieced together from some of the 50,000 fragments of papyrus, the ancient form of paper, discovered in Egypt over a century ago by two Oxford archaeologists, Bernard Grenfell and Arthur Hunt. They found these fragments preserved by the dry, hot sand of the desert, buried in the rubbish dumps of a long-vanished city, the city of the sharp-nosed fish. Named after the local deity, the pike, the Greeks called the town Oxyrhynchus when they settled there after the conquest of Egypt by Alexander the Great. The papyrus fragments date from the 1st to the 4th century AD, when it was part of the Roman Empire. So many layers, so many fragments and pieces, sent back to Oxford where scholars still toil to prise open their secrets. The intricate process of decoding and interpreting these ancient documents is the work of specialists or papyrologists. Their delicate and dedicated work is revealing an extraordinary coexistence of Greek, Roman and Egyptian culture. The city may have been run by Romans, speaking in classical Greek, but the fearsome Egyptian gods still had great power, judging by this 4th century fragment, invoking the headless god.
I call on the headless god, the one whose sight is in his feet, the one who wields thunder and lightning. It is you who pour fire from his mouth. It is you who command destiny. I call on you, Lau Sabaoth Adonai Carbathio. It is you who lie in a coffin of myrrh, at your head a cushion of resin and bitumen. You whom they call Anoth, Lord. Arise, spirit. You are not a spirit. You are the blood of the 30 and the 104 falcons that speak and keep vigil at the head of Osiris.
And how strange would any visitor find ancient Egypt if they woke up among its pyramids and its mummified, animal-headed gods? I asked the historian of Greek and Roman Egypt, Jane Rowlandson.
Egypt today is significantly different culturally from modern Britain. But also, I think even a modern Egyptian would in some ways find it quite an alien world. I think they would find the polytheism very alien. The fact that you've got several temples to several different gods in each community, that the gods are often depicted as zoomorphic in animal form or with animal heads. And I mean, the Romans found this very difficult to cope with, so I think we would find it also pretty alien.
Early 20th century occult interest in ancient Egypt gave new meaning to the word mummy, with its ghoulish notions of the waking dead. But 2 millennia ago, mummification, gluing layers of papyri around a corpse, was a profoundly religious act. When mummified and crowned with an abstract golden mask, the dead person was believed to partake of the being of Osiris, god of the underworld. Those same mummies, in the hands of the papyrologists today, offer another kind of frisson from the successful separation of papyri leaves which have been glued together for 2,000 years. Historian of the ancient world, Dorothy Thompson.
It's a strange world, the world of the papyrologist. What we work on is the waste paper of the ancient world, and this is preserved in all sorts of different ways. In Oxyrhynchus, it's the rubbish tips which have given us our sources. Somewhat earlier, It's recycled papyri that we have access to. The Greeks in Ptolemaic Egypt were very much into recycling. They used to send donkeys round to collect the waste paper from the government offices when they were thrown out, and these were then provided for the mummifiers, who turned these into mummy casing, sort of papier-mâché. So you can imagine there's something rather exciting about dismantling a piece of mummy casing. Cartonnage is what we call it. And finding there, well, we don't know what we're going to find. And that's rather exciting.
Delicately pulling apart the phyllo-pastry fragile papyri leaves, the papyrologist's heart beats faster. What will they find? A love letter? A prayer? A tax demand? An ode? Peter Parsons, Regius Professor of Greek at Oxford, has been working on the Papyrus Mountain with a team of scholars for 25 years. How do they do it?
Papyrus is extremely stable, so in some ways they are still in very good condition after 2,000 years. What's bad for them is to be very dry, in which case they crumble, or very wet, in which case they go mouldy. So it's often useful to clean them, for which you normally use alcohol. That's industrial methylated spirit, because that evaporates more or less as soon as you apply it. So you sit there with your papyrus in front of you and a camel hair brush, and brush very gently with alcohol.
This is exactly the same method used at the turn of the 20th century by the archaeologists who first unearthed the Oxyrhynchus hoard. Bernard Grenfell and Arthur Hunt pioneered the science of papyrology, and in a memo now in Oxford's Ashmolean Museum, Hunt describes his method and instruments.
My implements are 1. Any table of convenient size, the surface of which will not be spoilt by damp. 2. A couple of smooth cloths. Worn-out face towels are convenient in size and texture. 3. 3 small brushes, 1 soft, 1 medium, 1 hard. 4. A rather blunt penknife. 5. Good-sized sheets of paper. Any fairly stout unglazed paper, whether printed or plain, will serve. For smoothing the papyrus, there is nothing like the human thumb and fingers.
Normally speaking, for most of our time, the ink was made out of soot and glue, and in fact it's extraordinarily fast. It doesn't oxidize. It remains as black as it ever was. Later on, they turned over to something more like modern ink, which was a step down because it tends to turn brown with age, and if it's brown, it isn't so easily legible. But in the glory days, it really was, and you can still see on a papyrus the ink is still the same glossy black that it was 2,000 years ago.
As the words come into focus, touchingly ordinary messages may appear, like this letter from a first-century student to his father, thanking him for a food hamper.
I received the 6 measures of whole lentils, and a jar full of vinegar, and 126 pieces of salt meat, and the stuff in the jar, and 30 pieces of roast meat. Goodbye.
One of the great pleasures of life is opening a box of unpublished papyri, taking out the first thing that meets your eye, trying to get it the right way up, looking at the back, looking at its creases and stains, and then starting to read the writing to find out what it is. It may turn out to be a piece of Homer. It may turn out to be a household account. If it's Homer, well, there's the pleasure of seeing when Homer was being read and what Homer was being read and what kind of books people were handling. If it's a household account, better still in some ways, because it's bound to contain a word for saucepan, where you need to work out what kind of saucepan and what kind of word it is and how it relates to the development of ancient Greek to modern Greek. And of course, how many saucepans you needed to make a kitchen.
And how many saucepans is that?
Probably 1 saucepan, 1 frying pan, and several pots.
So, is it the same detective instinct that drives today's papyrologists, scrutinizing their fragments, frowning at the gaps in the text?
Although it's often vaunted as some sort of objective science, it's guesswork and intuition most of the time.
What got you interested?
I suppose I've always had that sort of crossword puzzle mentality, you know. I've always had a sense of the magic of the written word, and I think that's what makes a papyrologist. It's that love of the challenge of the text, that the text contains a locked-up secret that, with knowledge and a bit of application, you can reveal.
Part of the work, of course, is a jigsaw. because in most cases you don't have anything like a complete manuscript, you simply have bits. I think the most satisfying times I had in the last, this is a terrible omission, in the last 5 or more years, I think were 2. One was looking at a complete text, which was clearly a riddle. And it took me 3 years to see the answer. And suddenly one afternoon, there was a lateral shift in the mind, and I realized that it was in fact a joke about a leaky boat which had more water in it than outside it. And this is a very elementary joke, and that of course made it all the more difficult. But suddenly when you see that, and all details in the 4-line poem fit together, and you see that's what it means. The Greeks had a sense of humour, and some of their jokes are extraordinarily modern. Nonetheless, you don't always see a joke even in your own language. So you can spend 10 years trying to see a Greek joke. You have to wait like a cat outside a mouse hole, waiting for inspiration to poke its head out.
There's something exciting about working with a colleague on texts, because you can spark each other off and ask the questions that suddenly make the answer come to light. And now, with the modern technology, with the possibility of digitising papyri and then putting them up on a television screen, with the possibility of making them larger, with contrasting the colour, you can get a whole group of specialists round a text. And that, I've found, has been one of the most exciting ways of deciphering papyri, when you have 3 or 4 people who are interested in a text and ask each other questions and work together.
It's always very good if you can find the same text in 2 different papyri, as would happen, say, with a literary work which exists in more than 1 copy in the rubbish dump. It's like having 2 jigsaws, 2 identical jigsaws, except that the 2 sets each had 95% of the pieces missing, but a different 95%. And so one afternoon I was sitting there, and suddenly occurred to me that we had the line beginnings in 1 fragment of 1 copy, and we had 1 or 2 words from the ends of lines in another fragment of another copy, that if you actually took one of the beginning and ends of the same lines, it would work perfectly. And suddenly when you think that, you see that the bits of letters turn into words, and the words combine with other words into sentences, and the whole thing comes out. And you are the first person to see this since the fall of the Roman Empire, probably.
Have you ever seen a more miserable man? Seen a more unlucky lover? Here I stand at my own front door in the alley, and I mooch up and down, both ways, right up to now, which is midnight, when I could be sleeping and holding my beloved.
Those lines from the Greek playwright Menander were pieced together from fragments now carefully preserved in Oxford. The administrator of the Oxyrhynchus collection is Nick Gurneyce, who, when I met him in Oxford's Sackler Library, conveyed a youthful eagerness for the papyrus puzzle.
You can understand the passion. For example, when you work with papyri and when you're discovering things, you can't always keep track of your time. You can't realize that it's 5 o'clock in the morning, you have to go to bed. I mean, sometimes the excitement of the new discovery keeps you up. The thing with the papyri is that there's always something new. There's always a new piece of evidence that would solve an old problem, or would create a new one. That's more likely. You can never be bored when you do papyrology. It's full of frustration. There are always things that you can't read. There are always things that you can't place into context.
When it's intelligible, you feel this great sense of triumph. There it is, at least the voice from the past is now made real. And sometimes what the voice says is something about the price of vegetables in a year of drought. And that kind of thing does, of course, feed into the whole question of how the ancients lived in ancient conditions. And that certainly is part of what fascinates me about it.
It's certainly hard not to feel a sense of intimacy with these voices from the past, like this traveller, sick and far from home, writing to his sister in the 4th century AD.
Make every effort, my lady sister. Send me your brother. since I have fallen into sickness as the result of a riding accident. For when I want to turn on my other side, I cannot do it by myself unless 2 other persons turn me over. So please come yourself as well and help me, since I am truly in a strange place and sick. I searched for a ship to board, but I could not find anyone to search on my behalf, for I am in Babylon. I greet my daughter and all who love us by name. And if you have need of cash, get it from Isaac, the cripple, who lodges very close to you.
I can't help wondering who that Isaac was. Well, talking about locations, sometimes you can almost reconstruct a neighbourhood from the papyri, as in these instructions to an errand boy.
Directions for delivering letters to Rufus. From the Moon Gate, walk round as if you were going to the granaries. Then enter the first street and turn left behind the public baths. Go westwards. Go down the steps, then up, and bear right. And after the boundary wall of the orchard, there is a 7-storey house on the right, with a statue of Good Luck on the gatehouse, and opposite a basket weaver's. Ask there or from the concierge, and you will get information.
Papyrologists are able to match clues from the papyri with other evidence, words on chiselled tombs, or the vivid colours and vestments of the tomb portraits. Jane Rowlandson again.
If we start juxtaposing papyrus texts with other forms of written material from Egypt, which include tomb inscriptions, and also the wonderful evidence from Egypt, the mummy portraits, which show us the faces of some of the people of the kind that we can read about in the texts. And they show us the kind of jewellery that women would have worn, and exactly the kind of jewellery that we see described in the documents, particularly lists of dowries, would refer to earrings and necklaces, and the mummy portraits show women wearing exactly that kind of jewellery. And they also show us women wearing really quite brightly coloured garments, pink, green clothes.
These portraits, with their wide-eyed, steady gaze, aren't the only record of the population of Roman Egypt that we have. Sticklers for information, the Romans compiled a regular census. The rubbish tips yield many census returns, like this one, dated 202 AD.
To the governor and the royal scribe, and the district clerks and the village clerks from Thermutharium, daughter of Thounus, with Apollonius, son of Sotares, as her legal guardian. The residence in the house belonging to me on North Lane, I, Thermutharium, another woman, Thermutharium freedwoman of the aforementioned Sotares, age 65, middle height, honey-coloured, long-faced, scar on the right knee, total 3 women.
This woman, with her female living companions and her numerous household, seems to be one of many financially independent widows in Oxyrhynchus. The men, whose life expectancy was around 40, competed to marry younger women. When they died, the women kept the inheritance and often never found another husband.
I, Thermutharium, aforementioned, with my guardian, the same, Apollonius, swear by Tiberius, Claudius, Caesar, Augustus, Germanicus, the emperor, that I have submitted the preceding list of those living with me without fraud and in all truth, and that no one else lives with me, whether foreigner or Alexandrian or freedman or Roman or Egyptian, apart from the aforementioned. If I swear truly, may it be well with me. If I swear falsely, the opposite.
It's not just the city's social structure that papyrologists have explored, but also its scale of values, its ethos, often expressed in proverbs and wise sayings. Greek and Roman historian Teresa Morgan has made a special study of these.
Almost as soon as people learnt to read and write, they started copying out these maxims and sayings, just little clips, little one-line clips, which may be taken totally out of context, but when you take them out of context and put them all together, they sound like ethical teaching. It's like taking a quotation from Shakespeare, like "to thine own self be true," and then giving it to school children to write out again and again. And we find not only individual students writing out individual maxims as writing exercises, but we find large collections of these quotations. So it looks as if what was happening was that people were learning this in the course of their education, learning probably dozens or hundreds of these maxims, and they might have been completely random. I mean, all sorts of different kinds of ideas in them, like return your loans that you may borrow again, and the sea, fire and lions are a triple evil, or sometimes women, fire and lions are a triple evil, or marry in haste, repent in leisure. You know, there are lots and lots about women, all of them saying how terrible thing marriage is, and sometimes saying what a terrible thing it is to marry when you're old, because you'll be brought to your grave by your wife. There's a lot about wealth. They're very keen on wealth. Wealth is always a very good thing. And if you're rich, being wealthy, make sure you patronise the poor. Being poor, make sure you cultivate the rich. And people were learning probably dozens or hundreds of these.
If the statue of a poor man be struck by a thunderbolt and do not fall, it will be the beginning of happiness for him. But if the statue, when struck by the thunderbolt, falls down entirely, it indicates the destruction of his whole family.
The papyri contain many such extracts from school books. They reveal much more than the way pupils learn their alpha, beta, gamma. These children learn not only a language, but the world's grammar and syntax, the way the Greeks believed it was put together.
We've got lots and lots of grammatical texts surviving in children's hands and teachers' hands and things. And the layout of the text is very like the layout of a formal grammar in Latin or Greek nowadays, except that the order of cases was slightly different. It was nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, vocative. And first the singular and then the dual. Greeks got a dual, and then the plural. And I have a theory that that actually expresses something quite important about the mentality of the people who wrote these texts and are using these texts and are being taught these texts, because school children are learning through language, through grammar, that the centre of the universe, the primary, the most important thing is I, and then mine, of me, genitive next one, and then to me or for me, the dative, and then, only then, the objectifying accusative, me objectively seen, and only then the vocative, oh, you know, actually looking out at another person. And they're also being taught that the singular comes before the plural, which to us is obvious. But the interesting thing about this is that in places like Alexandria, among the scholars of Oxyrhynchus, in the Hellenistic period and into the early Roman period, this stuff is being invented. You know, they have no grammar before now. They have no way of describing the relationships between people and the space between people. And so what we have here is the sort of invention of a way of conceptualizing your world, yourself in relationship with your world, which is developing just at the time that we have all this information from Oxyrhynchus.
But for every deep insight, there are many more red herrings, as Dorothy Thompson reveals.
It can be extremely frustrating working on papyri. You can work for days and find that actually at the end you've just got a very common name. So common that there's no way you're going to be able to find out who this individual was, because there are hundreds of others called Petisuchos, son of Alexander, or Mares, son of Petisuchos.
I, Leonidas, alias Serenus, submitted this document. Year 3 of the Emperor Marcus Aurelius Commodus Antoninus Augustus Arminiacus Medicus Parthicus Sarmaticus Germanicus Maximus.
Well, that was one way, however laboriously imperial, of marking the year. Communications via papyri, public or personal, all go in for these name-festooned preambles and salutations. But through the forest of names it is possible to get to know individuals, intermarriages, whole families. Nick Gonese again.
What can happen very often is that you have a feeling that you know some of these people who turn up there. If you spend a year, for example, reconstructing the archives of a family and knowing who married whom and who were the sons and who were the daughters, I mean, at the end of the day, you just treat all these dead people like normal people. And, you know, getting to know, for example, that this particular personage had a daughter that you didn't know about, it's just like a piece of news that you hear nowadays. It's just, can't be even just gossip.
And idle gossip features in many of these letters, such as this one from a young man studying in Alexandria 2,000 years ago to a crony back home in Oxyrhynchus.
There was a time that that fine fellow Heracles, in his wicked way, was contributing a few pennies. But now that he has been arrested by Isidorus, quite rightly, he has run away and returned, I think, to you. Be aware that he wouldn't even hesitate to intrigue against you. He wasn't ashamed to spread stories gleefully round town about what happened in the theatre, and tell lies which even a prosecutor wouldn't.
What would we lack if these 50,000 sheets of written characters had been destroyed? We'd be at liberty to indulge what E.P. Thompson memorably called the immense condescension of posterity. Unencumbered by this evidence, we might write off Oxyrhynchus as just another primitive agricultural economy. We might think that Egypt had little in common with the rest of the Hellenistic world, and we'd miss the ebullient, uppity spirit of the student Theon, laying about his professors in this letter home.
You freed me from the depths of depression by saying that you don't mind about what happened in the theatre. By hurrying up to go downriver, I hope to achieve brilliant things. And what have I got for my enthusiasm? As things are, in my search for a literary expert, I found that both Chiron the Professor and Didymus, with whom there was some hope that I could make a success, had left town, leaving only scummy people with whom most of their students have gone straight road to disaster. Well, for myself, if I could find worthwhile professors, it would be the answer to my prayers never to see Didymus again, even from a distance. Write to me soon what you think about this.
These disinterred leavings turn us into entranced listeners, but able to hear only one half of a hubbub of conversations. And how tenuous is the luck that preserved even these fragments. The Arab conquest of Egypt hastened the decline of Greek as the common language of the country. Libraries in cities and monasteries were always in danger from fire and neglect. But if libraries perished, rubbish remained outside the city boundaries. And of all dumps, it's the rubbish dumps of Oxyrhynchus that provide the richest source. What a reminder that history and our attempts to interpret it hang by a fragile thread.
The City of the Sharp-Nosed Fish was presented by Michael Cousteau. Next week, at the same time, he reveals how literary treasures and family archives were buried side by side in the city's rubbish tips. The readers were Larry Lamb, Michael Percival Maxwell and Fiona Shaw. The producer was Amanda Hargreaves. And you can learn more about life in the city of Oxyrhynchus if you log on to our website, and that's at www.bbc.co.uk/Radio 4.